Also, da dringend aufs Baudelia. 아니, 아주 망어 야르츠기 다니마.
So today is the 12th day of our Marangok summer teachings. So on this 12th day, I'd like to wish all the lamas, chulkus, and teachers at our monasteries and nunneries, all the members of the Sangha, all of the students associated with our Dharma centers, as well as everyone from all different areas who are listening to the teaching. I would like to offer you my welcome. Yesterday, I began to speak about the deeds of our teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni. So yesterday, I gave a brief introduction to his deeds from taking birth into practicing austerities. And so today, I will continue speaking about the life story of the Buddha.
나들이야.
And speaking about the life of the Buddha, first I'd like to speak about this. Now, Prince Siddhartha had spent 6 whole years practicing austerities. No, just in terms of the, even disregarding the difficulties physically, these are hardships that are hard for us ordinary people to even begin to conceive of. And he underwent these. But no matter how many ascetic practices and austerities he underwent, he was unable to achieve the state that transcended the world or to realize the actual nature of things. And then he remembered something that happened when he was young, and this is something I mentioned yesterday. He had gone with his father, Shuddhadana, outside of the city to go oversee the farmers working in the fields. And so this is in our Tibetan scriptures. It's called a place called the farmer's town, Shinpei-dong. And so he went to see this, to this location. And when he got there, he sat underneath a tree and he sat there in meditation. And sitting under the tree, you could say he achieved the first jhana. He achieved the level of the first jhana and felt the pleasure of body and mind that's associated with the first jhana. And so he remembered this. He thought to himself, maybe if I did this way of practicing meditation that I did when I was young, when I was just a child, if I spend this whole time practicing austerities, then my body is just going to be hard on my body, but it's not going to have any other benefit. And so he stopped practicing the austerities. And he began to eat, we could say, coarse foods. In other words, he began to eat in order to So he had completely lost in the strength of his body, but to revive the strength of his body, he began to make some efforts towards this. Now, at that time, he had 5 companions or 5 people who were with him when he had been practicing austerities. When Prince Siddhartha began to stop practicing austerities and began to eat, what they thought to himself is, oh, this spiritual practitioner, Siddhartha Gautama, he used to be a prince, and so he must be attached to the enjoyments of being a prince. And so they thought that he had stopped practicing the path. So that was the impression that they had. And after that, they were all really disappointed in him, and they lost their confidence in him. And they thought, we're not going to stay with Prince Siddhartha. And so they left that place and went to Varanasi. Now, the forest where Prince Siddhartha was practicing austerities was near the Niranjana River, and so he stayed there. So he went to the Niranjana River and thought he would take a bath. Because if he hadn't eaten food for so long, forget about washing the body. And so his body was really quite filthy and unclean, and so he wished to bathe. Now, when he was bathing in the Niranjana River, he had spent such a long time practicing austerities that he had no strength at all. So he had so little strength that he was in danger of losing his consciousness, falling into a faint. When he was about to faint, then there was the daughter of a cowherd named Sujata. So the farmer named, so there was a daughter, Sujata, who was a cowherd. She's a daughter of a farmer, and her name was Sujata. And she saw him and then immediately began to take care of the Buddha. And since she was a cowherd, she offered him some milk porridge. Now, this milk porridge is extremely beneficial for this. Now, and the reason is the milk porridge is very nutritious. Some sutras say that the gods added many beneficial medicines to it, but we can forget about this for the moment. If you just think about milk, it has a lot of nutritional value. And so when he ate it, it had a great beneficial effect on his physical state. And so for the Buddha, this Brahmin girl, Sujata, was a great kindness. This is similar in the story of Milarepa. Milarepa had become into a very sad physical state and had no strength, and he came to the point where he was also lost his consciousness, in fact. And then some hunters came and gave him some food to eat. And because they gave him food and he ate the food, and then his body gained some strength. So the nutrition in the food revived the strength of his body and the strength of his mind, and then he was able to meditate more and had even more superior experiences in meditation that he'd had before. And this is something that we speak about within our. So this is why he said in a Song of Interdependence that the meditator in the mountain and the sponsors who support them have the interdependence of awakening to Buddhahood together. And so so in this way, this girl Sujata was very beneficial to him. Now there are other explanations that it maybe have been someone other than Sujata who offered him the milk. but I do not need to speak about them more. And then the Prince Siddhartha went to another forest in the nearby area. And within this forest, there was a tree called an Ashwatha tree. So an Ashwatha tree is, he sat below this Ashwatha tree. And he sat underneath it in meditation and samadhi. Now, up to this point, before, the Buddha had been practicing the non-Buddhist methods of samadhi meditation. To say that, so before that point, he was primarily practicing the non-Buddhist practices of shamatha meditation. Then from them, after he had revived his body, then he began to meditate on the insight. And so because if we're being audacious, we could say that he began the particular Buddhist meditations. When he and we developed the prajna that of discriminating praja, he realized that the self, the Atma, the self that is taught by the non-Buddhist, the permanent self taught by the non-Buddhist, does not exist, that it does not exist by nature. And when he realized this, then through this prajna of realizing the selflessness, he entered the jhana that transcends the world. And by sitting that, he was able to eliminate all of the afflictions and achieved the state of Buddhahood beneath this Ashwatha tree. So the Prince Siddhartha achieving Buddhahood was not any big ritual with a huge ceremony or anything. If you look at it from outside, he was sitting under a tree and there was nothing particularly special about it. Or you could say it was just a very ordinary situation. And it's in that situation that the Buddha achieved Buddhahood. Now, when we talk about an Ashwatha tree, so what is an Ashwatha tree? It's a species of tree, but later this tree became called the tree of enlightenment, the Bodhi tree. And the reason is that the Buddha achieved Buddhahood underneath this tree. So later this was called by the name of the Bodhi tree or the enlightenment tree. Now, when the Buddha awoke to enlightenment, what was the ultimate truth that he saw? Or what was the nature of things that he saw? So when you say he saw the nature of things, what is the nature that he saw? Ultimately, what did he know? This is a very big question. Now, there are many different in the four sections of the scriptures that gives many different answers to this, but we don't have these four scriptures in Tibetan, and so that's a rather disappointing situation. And so some say that he saw the meaning of the Four Noble Truths. Some say that he realized the nature of the meaning of the 12 links of interdependence. Some say that through the four jhanas and the three awarenesses, he realized the meaning of the nature of things. There are many different explanations of how they are, but I don't think there's really much of a contradiction between them, because so at this point, since I'm primarily speaking about history, I'm not going to talk about those in detail. Now, the place where the Buddha awoke to enlightenment was later called Buddha Gaya, or the essence of enlightenment. And the stupa was built, and then it eventually became the most important Buddhist site for pilgrimages all over the world. Likewise, according to the southern traditions and the Tibetan traditions, say that the Buddha awakened to enlightenment in the Vaishaka month. And so this entire month is considered a very sacred time. But even within the Buddhist scriptures, there are slightly different explanations of it. But I do not need to speak about those in detail either today. Then following that, what he did is he turned the wheel of Dharma. Now, before I speak about turning the wheel of Dharma, so after the Buddha had reached enlightenment, or you could say after he had achieved seeing the nature of things as he had wished to do, there was no one disturbing him, and so there were no afflictions, and all the stains and obscurations were pacified, and so he rested in equipoise and utter peace, and he spent 7 days sitting in samadhi meditation underneath the Bodhi tree. Then after 7 days, he arose from that samadhi and he went to other trees, and he continued, since he had achieved such the amazing state of complete and perfect awakening. So he's sort of enjoying the experience of it, and feeling the experience of it. So since we haven't achieved complete and perfect enlightenment, we can't really imagine that experience. But actually, when we think about when we experience the pleasures of the sensory pleasures like form, scent, taste, and so forth, we get really tricked by them. But the Buddha had the experience of achieving the ultimate liberation, realizing the ultimate actual nature of things. And so this is an inconceivable experience, one that we can't even think of. But he experienced it, and he just spent 5 weeks sitting there just experiencing that feeling. And after he'd experienced that feeling, what he thought to himself was, that this Dharma that I've realized, this profound meaning that I have understood and known, even if I taught it to other people, they couldn't understand it. It's just too profound. It's just too far from them. Even if I teach it to other people, there's no way they could understand it. So the Dharma, there's no point in teaching the Dharma to other people. And he thought. And so at the beginning, he had more of a thought that he shouldn't teach the Dharma. However, you could say that this was like the benefit for himself. The benefit for himself is realizing the nature of things, achieving enlightenment. And so he had completed the benefit for himself, the most important benefit for himself. But once he had accomplished the benefit for himself, and he enjoyed the experience of it for a period of time, that took some time. And then when he kind of sort of arose from that profound feeling, and he kind of went out from that feeling, and then he had another thought, and the other thought was this: that he must subdue other sentient beings. He had accomplished the benefit for himself. He must bring benefit to others. And so he began to have this other thought as well. And when he thought about benefiting others, what is the best benefit for others? It is to teach them the Dharma. So, to explain the meaning that he had realized just as it is to others. And so this is to teach the Dharma, or to turn the wheel of Dharma. So turning the wheel of Dharma, this is like an analogy, right? It's like as a wheel. When you have a when you have a cartwheel or like a car, the wheel on a car, just when the car is going, it moves it keeps rotating all the time, right? And so this is the same with the wheel of Dharma. It's like an analogy for teaching the Dharma, and it's called turning the wheel of Dharma, but it means just teaching the Dharma. So basically, he thought to himself, I need to teach the Dharma to others. And he decided to teach. Now, what some scholars say is that at that time the Buddha had achieved Buddhahood and immediately had the thought of passing into nirvana and just entering the just complete expanse of peacefulness. And so when he had the wish to sort of stay in that state, they say it is possible that he had this feeling. Now, this is not a Mahayana question. This has come out of like a common Buddhist vision. So they say it is possible that he might have had this thought. And so when the Buddha achieved Buddhahood under his own power alone, and so as he sat there experiencing alone the peace of enlightenment. And so later, when there's a lot of talk about Pratyeka Buddhas and their deeds, it's probably is based on that experience that the Buddha had. So some scholars hypothesize that is how the tradition of talking about Pratyeka Buddhas and the paths of the Pratyeka Buddhas began from that. Now, other scholars don't disagree, and they say that actually at the time of the Buddha, there were also sages who lived on their own. And so the origin for saying Pratyeka Buddha is based on those sages who are practicing Dharma alone. This is according to other sages. So this is a different way than talk about Pratyeka Buddhas than our traditional way of speaking about them. Because in our Buddhist tradition, we speak about Pratyeka Buddhas, and so scholars wonder, what is the basis for saying Pratyeka Buddhas? What is the history? People wonder that. If we say, well, it happened in previous eras, in previous kalpas, then the scholars say, well, you have to look and say, what is the basis for this name? What is the place it could have come from? And so that's how they can speak about it. So this is very different, a bit different from our traditional way of speaking things. And it's important for us to take note of that. And then when the Buddha had decided that he was going to benefit sentient beings and teach the Dharma, and so the second step in this was to think about who would be best to teach the Dharma to first. You have to teach the Dharma. Well, who are you going to teach it first? And he needed to teach it to someone who could actually understand the profound Dharma that he had taught. If you were to teach the Dharma to someone who just couldn't understand anything at all, who couldn't understand at all, then it wouldn't be of any benefit. And so then he thought about who would be best to teach it first, and in the end, there are the 5 companions he'd had when he was practicing austerities. He'd been practiced the austerities together. They had a certain degree of practice. And they also had some sort of a connection. So he thought to himself he needed to teach to these 5 friends. And he thought that he needed to teach them, and if he taught them, he thought, well, and he thought to himself, oh, they'll probably be able to understand the profound meaning that I have to teach. And so he went to Varanasi. And so they went to Mrigadhaya, the Mrigadhava, the deer park in Sarnath. So these days we call it, these days we say Sarnath, but it's called the deer park in Mrigadhava in originally. And so we went to that place. to teach the Dharma to his five farmer companions. And so this, when he taught the Dharma to them, this is when the Sangha, the community of the Sangha, first began. So that's that time the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha came at that time, because the Buddha was the Buddha Shakyamuni. Then the Buddha actually taught the Dharma. And who did he teach the Dharma to? It was to the five companions. And so later we'd call them the good group of five. And so these include the Ashvajit, and Kushkandinila, and so forth. So there's a place of Sarnath is like, we can go to Sarnath and still see the remains of this site. And there was also an Ashokan pillar with that Emperor Ashoka had erected, that had a lion as its capital. And after India achieved independence, this became the symbol of the country of India. In any case, so the Buddha taught these five people, the good group of five. He taught them the middle way, a way that didn't go too far off to either one side or the other, to the right or the left, but instead one that went right down the center. So he taught them where they went, the middle way or the middle method. And he taught them what the four truths are. He introduced the meaning of each of these. And because of teaching these, then these five students realized that nature, became the Buddhist students, and achieved arhatship. So in terms of the Buddhist religion, this is like the first community or the first Sangha. When we talk about the noble Sangha, this is what we mean. And so in this way, we had all three of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. There was a person named Yasha, and he was a householder, as well as his two parents and his wife. They all became students of the Buddha, and they became the first lay followers, the first male and female householders of the Upasaka and Upasika. And so these are the five people. And so it's said that Yasha later became an arhat. So that he achieved the level of arhatship while he was still wearing the robes of an arhat. So he first realized the nature while wearing the household. So this is where the quote of seeing the nature of things is what makes you the actual spiritual practitioner. It doesn't matter so it's like Yasha had not given up the householder, the clothes of householder, yet he realized the nature of how things are. And so in the outside, he was not a bhikshu, but internally, he actually was a bhikshu who had realized the nature of things. When you think about Yasha, he also had 4 friends who were very close to him. And there were also 50 other friends, and they all went forth and later achieved the state of arhatship. So when you think about the community, the fourfold community of the Buddha and the community of the Sangha grow larger and larger. And so when the Yasha and his siblings joined, or friends joined, there were 50 friends. And then what the Buddha said to his students is, you need to go and spread the Dharma, he said. You need to go benefit other sentient beings. And so he said this to his students. So the reason why he needed to say this is that the Buddha was doing whatever he could, using whatever methods he could, thought that if as many people as possible could realize the nature as it is, then they would be freed from suffering. And so that great compassion or the great loving kindness in his mind. And he says, so he sent his students in all directions to spread the Dharma all over and to benefit sentient beings. And so this is the advice or the instruction that he gave his students. And so from the very beginning, the Buddha had the intention of spreading the Dharma. And so this is another point that we actually need to really note. And this is an important thing for us to keep in mind. And the reason for this is that because at the beginning, the Buddha had this sort of the idea of not wanting to speak the Dharma. Like at the beginning, he thought to himself, I can't teach the Dharma. Other people won't realize it. It's too profound. And so he didn't teach it. So at the beginning, he predominantly felt that way. But later, when he began to teach, then he thought, now that I have achieved the benefit myself, I need to do something to benefit others. And so at that time, and so if I teach the Dharma that must be taught to others, then if I'm going to benefit them, then they have to be taught the Dharma. So he had this profound understanding and began to teach the Dharma to others. It's like the Buddha's. It wasn't like the Buddha. The Buddha wasn't something where he realized and thought, immediately, I have to teach it to others. It's like he had to thought about it first. Usually, in most of us, when we think about something, when we understand, we have to say to something, look what I understand. We have to kind of show it off to others. I've understood I didn't understand before, we say. And immediately we kind of boast of it. We try to look, is there someone we can kind of find to tell this? We look for someone, we kind of get someone to listen to us. But the Buddha wasn't like that. Please wait a moment.
Oh, yeah. And so
the Buddha had this profound thought of teaching the Dharma, and he thought, who could I teach the Dharma to? What Dharma can be taught to them? And he had this very profound intention, and then only then he began to teach the Dharma. And the people he taught the Dharma, and he's first thinking about who can I teach the Dharma to first? He chose them. He chose people who should teach the Dharma, who needed to be taught the Dharma. It just wasn't everyone who we met on the truth, not everyone who had a pair of ears. And so this is another crucial point. The Buddha teaching, spreading the Dharma was like a really profound intention. And you want to see is it going to benefit the others? And it wasn't like he was first going to say, I'm going to teach it first to others. I'm going to sort of show off to others or spread his own view, or so that his own tradition would spread everywhere. Now, that wasn't his intention, and it's important for us to keep this in mind. So now we will have a half-hour intermission. So now I will continue with the teaching. Now, after the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, then the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, the three jewels that all of us Buddhists go for refuge to, had originated. And then the Buddha left the region of Varanasi to go return to Magadha, the central kingdom of Magadha. So he returned to the kingdom of Magadha, which is at that time in India, there were 16 powerful kingdoms, and among them, and when he went to Magadha, he had many different students. In particular, at that time, there was a non-Buddhist at that time, a Hindu. There was an important personage in the Brahmanic religion whose name was Uruvela Kassapa. So his name was Uruvela Kassapa. So his name in Tibetan, Tingye was Rabachen. And so at that time, he was very well known in Magadha, and he was a very important religious figure. And he became a student of the Buddha. And since he was such an important religious figure, his two younger siblings, and all of his other students, became students of the Buddha. So for this reason, the Buddha immediately became extremely very famous in Magadha. Magadha was a very famous figure, and when he became a student of the Buddha, then everyone was surprised, and his name immediately became well known throughout Magadha. And so the Buddha gathered all his students and he brought them together to Rajgir. So Rajgir, so that was like the capital of the kingdom of Magadha. When he arrived at Rajgir, there was King Bimbisamba. The other day I was mistaken. Yesterday I said that when the Buddha he said that he had met King Bimbisara on the way. That was not King Bimbisara, that was King Prasenajit. And the reason for that is that because the Kapilavastu and Devadahu were part of they were under the control of Kosala, and the king of Kosala was Prasenajit. And when the king of Prasenajit saw that the king, Prince Siddhartha, had gone forth from home to homelessness, and he said, this is not okay. He was one of his subjects, and so he gave him that advice, as you must not go forth, he said. So yesterday I got that mixed up. So at that time, to continue where it left off, he went to the palace in Rajgir, and there, the king there was King Bimbisara. The Bimbisara went for refuge to the Buddha and became one of his lay students. And at the same time, he also gave him a grove. It's like a park or a grove that Bimbisara offered to the Buddha as a place for the Sangha to stay. And so the Bombay Grove was probably the first place for the Sangha, the community of the Sangha, to stay, the first residence. Also, King Bimbisara also became a patron of the Sangha. Now, all the pictures were staying in the Bamboo Grove, and that became like the hub of Buddhism at that time. And when it became that, then everyone of all levels of society within Rajgir And they all rushed to Bimbisara. It's like they thronged there every day to come and become Buddhists. And in particular, while the Buddha was in Rajgir, there were three important students of the Buddha who came at that time. These were Shariputra, Moggallana, and Mahakashyapa. So these three. So Shariputra, Moggallana, you probably know. Among the monastic students of his students. And of course, with the monastics, we have the monks and the nuns. And among the monks, the one with the greatest prajna, it was Shariputra. The one with the greatest miraculous power is Moggallana. And now Mahakashyapa later would become like the regent of the teachings, you could say, and become like the Dharma teacher, who was like the representative of the Buddha. And later, during the council to compile the teachings, Mahakashyapa had a very great influence on the compilation of the teachings. And so these three main students, Shariputra, Moggallana, and Mahakashyapa, are among the three primary students of the Buddha. And they became students of the Buddha while he was staying, during that time when he was staying in Magadha. And then where did the Buddha go? And so then the Buddha went to Kosala. So he went to Kosala to spread the Dharma. Now, in the region of Kosala, there was the primary student, a main student, lay student of the teacher, and this is a student whose name was Anathapindata. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this householder, Anathapindata, was from the Shravasta. It was probably a resident of Shravasti, the capital of Kosala, and he was probably the largest or the greatest merchant in Shravasti at that time. And so one of the most important things is that there were many orphans to whom he gave food every day. He was always feeding, being generous, being generous to them, and so therefore he was always giving food to those without. He was always giving food to those who were without defense, and so he's called Anathapindata, or he who gives food to the defenseless. So that was like a nickname given to him by others. His actual name was probably Sudatta. And then the Buddha, he one time came for business to Rajgir. And when he was in Rajgir, he heard that there was a Buddha that had appeared. There's a Buddha here, he heard. And the Buddha was so famous at that time that Anathapindata heard of him. And he thought to himself, well, I better go meet this Buddha. And so one day before the sun rose, he went up and he went out from the city and he went to the bamboo grove, where the grove and park where the Buddha and the Sangha were staying. And so he went there to meet the Buddha. And so this householder, Anathapindata, went to see the Buddha. He went for refuge. And he asked him, please come to Shravasti. Please come to the kingdom of Kosala and to its capital, Shravasti. So he made this request, and it seems that the Buddha accepted it. And when he accepted it, then Anathapindata quickly returned to Kosala. So So the king Bimbisara had to get offered a place for the Sangha to stay in Rajgira that had been offered by the king Bimbisara, and so Anathapindata thought that there needed to be a place for some place to the Sangha to stay in Shravasti. And so then in Shravasti there was the Jetavana Grove. This is by the Prince Jetas. So the Prince Jeta was probably a sibling or cousin of the king Prasenajit. And so it was his own private park. And he said to him, please sell me this park. And Prince Jetava said, I'm not going to sell it to you. But Anita Pandada was really insistent, and he kept insisting. And in the end, what they say is, what the prince said, if you cover the ground of the entire park with, if you cover it with, if you cover it with gold, I'll sell it to you. And so he let that slip from his mouth. And so Natapindada, gathered all the gold. And so he went. In the end, what happened is he continued to insist, and he said, went to Independent, said, so there's probably some sort of a court case or something about this. You said this before, right? It's something that, so he said, cover it with gold, right? So you've already said that, so you need to give it to him. And so in that way, the Anathapindata thus got the Jeta Grove. So Anathapindata was so rich that he bought it for an extremely high price. And he bought it, and then he built like a monastery. He looked a monastery for the Sangha to stay in. Now, it only took them 3 months to build it, so I think that they probably built a very simple monastery. It probably wasn't a very elaborate structure. Some people say that it's probably made out of, it's possible it's made of wood, they say. In any case, he built this, the monastery, and the Buddha and his retinue all came and stayed there. And so the Jetavana Grove is the place where the Buddha taught the Dharma for longest. It's the place where the Buddha spent the longest there in Shravasti. Now, the king of Shravasti was King Prasenajit. But the king Prasenajit, it was only very late that the king Prasenajit went for refuge to the Buddha. The main reason why the king Prasenajit went to refuge for them was because of his wife, one of his queens, Queen Malika. Now, he had many different wives, several wives, but among them was one named Malika. And so she encouraged him, and because of that, he went for refuge. Now, this is a little bit early. This one came too early. And so he became a student of the Buddhas. Now, the Buddha's father, King Shuddhadana, heard of all these deeds of his son, the Buddha, and he hadn't seen his son, he hadn't seen the Buddha for a long time, so he wished to see him. And so when he heard about the deeds of the Buddha, and so this really moved him, and so King Shuddhadana said that he had this hope to see the Buddha once. And when he expressed this, then the Buddha returned to his homeland of Kapilavastu. And so this is the father and son meeting. We have a Mahayana Sutra called the meeting of the father and son, right? So the father went to see his father, the king, and as well as the Buddha went to see his queen. When he was the prince, he had the queen Yashodhara and also his son Rahula. And so when the Buddha and his retinue always came to see him, this is a picture of them waiting and watching him as he came into the city. Now, the queen Yashodhara later also went forth and became a student of the Buddhas. So she became a student of the Buddha, and later became a student of the Buddha. Likewise, also his son, Rahula, also went forth. But at that time, Rahula, when he was very young, So he gave him the novice vows and entrusted him to an elder student. Now, at that time, when he went to the area of Kapilavastu, his homeland, and when many of the youths in Shakya in Kapilavastu heard him, many of the Shakya youths wanted to go forth. Some asked their parents and went forth, and some didn't ask their parents and then secretly went, and only later asked their parents. And so there were many events around that. Now, among them, who was there? There was Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, Ananda. They both went forth at that time. And also his half-brother Nanda, the same father and a different mother. So his younger half-brother Nanda also went forth at that time. And even in the end, there was the barber, the Shakyan barber named Upali from a very low caste, who also went forth. Now, Upali is actually a very important topic. And now the important thing that happened is that he was a Shudra. He was in the lowest of the castes. And because he was the lowest of the caste, so at that time, in the Indian tradition, the people from the lower castes had no right at all to practice the Dharma. They had no right to practice the Dharma. They weren't even allowed to recite the words of the Dharma. They weren't even allowed to recite Dharma texts. They couldn't say anything other than Nama, I prostrate to you. They couldn't recite any words. And if they did, they would actually cut the tongues out. So the Shudras, the outcasts, had absolutely no right to practice Dharma. So at that time, someone from the lowest, a very low caste who had no right to practice Dharma, a barba named Upali, went forth with the Buddha. And the way he went forth is, they could tell the story in short. At that time, there were many Shakyan youths had come to the Buddha to go forth. They wanted to all go forth. They were all rushing to go forth. And when you want to go forth, you first have to shave your head, right? When you're going to shave your head, Upali was the barber. So all the youths would go to Upali. They'd call him and have him shave their heads. And we shaved their heads. There was a Shakyan prince named Bhadraka, and he recognized them. And so the prince Bhadraka and Shravasti and Upali recognized each other because he was always cutting his hair, right? So they recognized each other, and when Upali was shaving the prince Bhadraka's head, Upali was crying, shedding tears as he shaved his head. So he said, "We're all really happy for you to go off and go forth. And so why are you crying?" And so Upali said, "Oh, please don't be offended. I felt very sad," he said. But Prince Bhadraka had always treated him really well. And so he's saying, "I'm going to go forth," and then go off in different areas. And so I thought he was never going to see him again. And so for that reason, I'm very sad and I'm crying. And so the king, Prince Bhadraka said, gave him an opinion. He says, he said, "You don't need to worry. We will help it. So make sure that you have a good life." And so I said, And so we are all of us princes are going off. And so we will give all of our jewelry. We don't need any of our gold and silver ornaments. So they all gathered them all together. They all gave them to Upali, and Upali himself. So Upali they thought that Upali could sell them and use them for himself. And the princes all thought this was great, and they all accepted. And they gave all their jewelry and all their gold to Upali. And when they gave them to Upali, so he was supposed to go back home, but what he immediately thought is, if I take all these jewels and carry this all back, then if King Shotodan and all the ministers hear about this, then they'll think that they might think that I made them, that all Badrika and all the youths go forth, and they're going to punish me. And so I don't want this. So I thought maybe I can go forth with them. And he had this thought, maybe I could go forth. When he thought this, he left all the jewels underneath by a tree. And he went to go forth. And as he's going along the path, he's thinking to himself, just thinking, so I better I'm a Shudra, so how can I go forth? They're all the Kshatriya caste, they're all the high caste, and I'm the low caste, and so how can I go? How can such an ordinary person, such an inferior person, how is it possible for me to go forth? I don't even have any right or ability to go forth, he thought. So I was thinking about that, so he was very sad, and so he sat there crying, sitting by the side of the path. And so then he heard someone saying, "Hey, why are you sitting there crying? Why are you so sad?" When he heard that, he looked up and said, "Who was it?" It was Shariputra. So Shariputra said to Upali, "Why are you so sad? Why are you sitting there crying?" And that's why he's crying. Then Upali said, said, "Actually, you're one of the greatest of the Buddha students. So when you go to the Buddha, please ask the Buddha. Please, you have to ask him this question. Can someone like me, someone who's in a Shudra caste, are we allowed to become a student? Are we allowed of the Buddha? Are we allowed to go forth? Please ask him this question." Maybe I'm being really audacious to think this, but please ask him. When Upali said this, Shariputra said, "What is your name?" And when he said, then, "My name is Upali," he said. And Shariputra immediately said, "The Buddha, the Dharma's Buddha, in the Buddhist Dharma, there's no distinction of caste or clan. The Buddha is someone who has an equality for all and equal feelings for all. And so for that reason, so whoever you are, you're allowed to go forth. And so you please just come with me." And the Buddha will be delighted to give you the vows of going forth. So this is what Shariputra said, and Upali was just delighted. And he went off with Shariputra to see the Buddha. They went to the Buddha, and then at that time, he went forth. Now, the way he went forth at that time, This is the way of going forth by saying, "Come hither, bhikshus." In many different. So he was the first to. He went forth first, and then the other person. So then he was already a senior in terms of position, and so all the Shakya princes came a little later. Now Upali had already gone forth. So now you have to prostrate to the person who is superior to you. So who is superior to them? It was Upali, but they wouldn't prostrate him. And the reason is because he was a Shudra. He was a sort of low caste. They said, how can we prostrate him? We're a high caste, they said. We're in the Kshatriya caste, and it's not okay for a Kshatriya to prostrate a Shudra. It's like, reversing heaven and earth. And among them, Devadatta really objected to it strongly. Now, Upali, in any case, went forth in this way. And what this shows us is and so then later the Upali became the person who was greatest at holding the precepts. He was the one who had the greatest disciplines. He became very well known for this. Also, during the council, when they were compiling the words of the Buddha, then there's the compilation of the Vinaya. During that time, Upali was extremely helpful. So this is another reason why we need to really pay attention to this. And so it shows that the Buddha has this equal loving kindness for all. And actually, in India, there were the divisions into 4 castes, and the entire society was based on this foundation and this structure of the 4 castes, 4 castes. And the Buddha had just turned it all upside down and made it so there was no higher or lower caste and no distinction in caste, and gave everyone the opportunity to practice Dharma, and gave the right to practice the Dharma to everyone. And so this is one of the most important things that shows us how the Buddha really did have loving kindness, equal loving kindness and compassion for all. Now, another example of the Buddha's great compassion and loving kindness is this. And so what this is the person who raised Buddha was Prajapati, because the Buddha's mother had passed away 7 days after the Buddha had died. And so his stepmother, the one who had raised him from the time he was young, was Prajapati. And when she saw the Shakya youths going off to go forth and becoming students of the Buddha, she also decided, she felt like she wanted to go forth. And she brought the Shakyan women to the Buddha and expressed her wish to go forth. And she asked to go forth. Now, she made the request, but it was a very long time that during a very long time, the Buddha would not give her permission. They requested the Buddha several times, and in addition, they asked they asked Ananda to influence him, to use him as a messenger, and only through him, only then did women receive the permission to go forth. And when he gave them permission, then you could start the monastic order for women. The order of bhikshunis only developed at that time. But when the bhikshu and the bhikshunis communities would come together, then there would be some difficulties and problems. If you don't know exactly how to treat each other, then it gets very complicated. And so that there would not be any such difficulties, he said that the Buddha absolutely had to accept the 8 weighty dharmas, and he made this very strict rules. Now, I've spoken about the bhikshunis several times. Now, at one point, when you look at it, if we look at this, and it's not only in India was there the definitive 4 castes, but there also, at the beginning, there had been a certain degree of equality for women, but later their situation got worse and worse, and their rights grew smaller and smaller, especially they had fewer and fewer rights, especially in terms of religion. And so that sort of environment, he gave the full rights and full permission for and freedom for women to practice the Dharma. Not only did he give them that freedom, because of the instructions and guidance of the Buddha, there are many excellent women who achieved great high states. For example, the Chema, who was the greatest with intelligence, and Dharmadina was another with the superior prajna. In the end, eventually, they were also able to teach Dharma to the bhikshus. So they also developed that sort of power, that power of the qualities, so the education. Likewise, there is also the bhikshuni Upalavarna, who gained mastery and miraculous powers, just like Madhgalyana. Now, I'm speaking primarily according to the Theravada, or the Shravaka Chazit. So I think this is Kisha Gotami, and I think this is in Tibetan Gautama Khema. So Kisha Gotami was said to be supreme in her realization of the nature. Now, of course, there are many different ways explained in different sutras. So what I'm primarily using as my sources here are the sutras from the Southern Buddhist traditions. So whether we're talking about when we're talking about the students of Buddhists, among the male students, there are many excellent students. Among the female students, there are many excellent students or superior students. Also, among householders, there are many who are also superior practice students in terms of the householders. Among all his household students, there was one named Chitta. So he had a student named Chitta. And among all the householders, he was the one with the greatest prajna. And so in terms of understanding the meaning of the Dharma, he was the superior. Likewise, in Vaishali, there was a householder called Uga. And also there was the Shakya and Mahanama. And they became very well known as the greatest patrons or donors who were giving food to the poor and so forth. And also, there are also many students who became various, and they're from various stories. For example, there was the notorious murderer Angulimala. I'm going to think about Angulimala. What this is. So at that time, there were many famous bandits in India. And so one of them, his name was Angulimala. He'd killed many people. Some people say that he'd said 999 people. Some people say that he'd killed even more. In any case, he had killed hundreds of people. And not only that, he was very cruel in the way he killed. And once he'd killed a person, he'd immediately cut their finger off, and he'd made a necklace out of them, and he wore that necklace of fingers. And so he always was wearing this necklace of his fingers, and he was a really cruel and savage person whom everyone was afraid of. And so he was like a really horrible person. But the Buddha gave him advice, and in the end, he became a student of the Buddha. Not only that, he became an arhat. So this is another story that occurred at that time. And so what this shows is that the Buddha said no matter how horrible a person was, the person everyone in society hated, the person that they criticized, that they didn't like, whom they're afraid of, even that sort of a person could become a student of the Buddha, and become a good person, even a superior person. Likewise, among our 16 arhats, there is the student Chulapantaka. And so what he was is, he had it's no memory at all. If we're talking about it, if we say actually he's basically someone who's he couldn't memorize even a single line of verse. These days we'd say that he's have some sort of that he was mentally disabled. He was unable to memorize even a single line of verse. He'd remember it now, and then a moment later he'd forget. But the Buddha gave him guide, instruction. Because of that, he was able to realize the profound nature. This person who couldn't recite a line of verse realized the profound nature. And there are many other famous students, but if I were to speak about all of them, they just couldn't. So in particular, one I want to point out in particular is there's a sutra in the Theravada tradition called the Sutta Nipata. This means the short sutras. And within that sutra, there is a chapter. It's called the Parayanavagga. Parayanavagga. So this chapter of the Sutta Nipata is called the Paranavata, which if we translate it would probably mean that the Sutra of the Transcendic Vehicle. And what it explains in this is that they're from the south of India. Now, we've been speaking about all from central India and the northern part of India, right? There was a region of South India called the Deccan regions. There was a Brahmin there, and the Brahmin's name was Bhavarin. So the Brahmin in Bhavarin, he brought 66 of his students to go receive teachings from the Buddha. They came from a really long way away. In India, it's very difficult to travel. These days, if you have to go to the south, you have to go spend many hours on the tree. And it takes a few hours by plane, right? So at that time, it's such a long, far away. But they came from they went from even so far away. They went to receive teachings from the Buddha, and they arrived in central India. And at that time, among the 66 students that he brought with him, there were two Brahmin boys. One is named Ajita. So in Tibetan, this is called Mipampa, or the unconquered. And another is called Tissa Metea. So Ajita and Tissa Metea. So these two students among them. So later, some academics researching this thought that when we speak about the Maitreya, the protector Maitreya in the Mahayana Sutras, this is probably them. Probably maybe this is just one person, they say, and that is Maitreya, they say. And so that's what they say. In any case, no, we don't need to examine whether or not they actually were Maitreya, but at that time, even people from the south of India, from very far ways, came to see the Buddha. And how do we know that? And so what this shows us is that many people really loved the Buddha, and the Buddha was very welcoming to everyone. Now, the Buddha taught by the Dharma at that time was protected by the Kshatriyas, and there are also many people from the Vaishya class and so because of this, the Buddhist teachings spread very widely, and it grew larger and larger. So the strength of the teaching became stronger and stronger. So by the time the Buddha had passed into nirvana, at that time, it's like the Buddha was like the sun at noon. And the teaching of the Buddha had spread in many regions of India. And so whether someone was a sage or a Brahmin or a god or a demon, or no matter who they were, there wasn't anyone who would have been able to stop the Buddha's teachings from spreading. The Brahmins couldn't stop it. The gods or demons couldn't stop it. No one could stop the spread of Buddhism. It was spreading so widely at that point. However, we always say that for every god, where gods flourish, the demons also flourish. And so there are many problems during the time of the Buddha. So even in the latter half of the Buddha life, there are also many difficulties that arose, or important events. Now, one of these, there are several different problems. And the main person who was making the problems was Devadatta. The biggest event in the latter half of the Buddha's life is the schism of when the Sangha was divided into two parts. And how the schism happened is that there's the king of Bimbisara who had become a student of the Buddha, as I mentioned, but later. But King Bimbisara had a child named Ajatashatru, who put his father in a prison. Put him in the prison, and he made himself king. And then Ajatashatru went over to Devadatta. Devadatta had done various things, whether it was like pretending to do various things. But anyway, in any case, Ajatashatru went to take refuge in Devadatta. And so what happened is that Devadatta also became well known because Ajatashatru had become a student. So Devadatta became even more well known. So when he became well known, Devadatta also got a little bit more confident. What he hoped to do was, and so the Buddha had the community of the Sangha. And so he had this hope that he would then take over the Buddha's Sangha. The Buddha was getting old. He said, please just give me your Sangha. Just give me. We're cousins, right? So I can take him. So just give me the Sangha and I'll take care of them, he said. So he had the idea of kind of controlling. He had this desire to control the Sangha, and he has expressed this wish to the Buddha. When he gave this idea to the Buddha, then the Buddha didn't accept it at all. If the Buddha doesn't accept it, then he got angry. And he thought to himself, I have to get rid of the Buddha. And he thought to himself, I have to get rid of the Buddha. And he tried many different ways. One of them is that he set a crazed elephant off to them. So he gave the elephant alcohol. The elephant got drunk, and some people say it's one, some people say it's many elephants. In any case, the elephants got drunk, and they went, and he said, let this drunk elephant on the path where the Buddha was going on his alms round, and the elephant almost killed it, but in the end, then the Buddha pacified the elephant, and the Buddha had bowed down before him. So Buddha thought to himself, using the elephants didn't work. So I need to do something myself, he thought. And so what he did one time, as the Buddha was going down along the road, he waited on the path up on a hill above. He's waiting on the hill, and as the Buddha was walking by, he sort of like a boulder, a huge rock, right? And he pushed it down, right? And almost killed the Buddha. And at that time, he couldn't have killed the Buddha, but he did injure the Buddha's foot. And so this is where drawing Buddha from the blood with a malicious intent came from. So he injured the Buddha's foot, and it drew blood. And so that is in it. And then the next thing he did, what Devadatta said, I better make 5 different precepts, like as an opponent to rival this. Among them was not eating meat. He said, eating meat, Gautama eats meat. He says you can eat meat. And it talks about having eat meat that's free of the three spheres. But if you eat meat that harms sentient beings, that's not good. So my disciples will not eat meat at all. In my opinion, you shouldn't eat meat at all. Killing, and so he said many things that are kind of like very attractive. He made these 5 attractive rules, and he made these 5 precepts. And there are a lot of young monks on them. And so he deceived them all. He fooled them all. And said, he spoke so nicely and said that, oh, it must be so. And said, oh, that's it. And they all, and they probably went like this. So Devadatta said various things, and so then he just drew them up. Most of them followed him. These were the young monks, right? Most of the young monks were fooled by monks, and they led off by Devadatta. And so then there were 2 parties. the monastics were divided into two disciplines. There are two groups. So in the two groups, then he thought to himself, Devadatta Thamsen, yeah, no, I'm something. Then next, what happened is that Shariputra and Maugalyana, and they worked really hard. And they brought all the students of all the monks who had followed Devadatta off, and they brought them back. And in the end, Devadatta's community fell apart. It didn't work. So now among them, there are many people, including Kokalika, and Jatarathra also supported him, right? And so, but among them later, what happened with Jatarathra, he actually felt regret because he'd killed his own father. And so he went to go for refuge to the Buddha and became a student of the Buddhas. Not only that, the Kosalan Prasenajit also had a really evil son. And this was called Viruddhaka. And so this son named Viruddhaka, he wouldn't listen to anyone. If he had a friend, he listened to this other friend's advice. There was his father, the king, right? King Prasenajit. So he exiled King Prasenajit. He sent him off and brought him to the bottom of the border and sent him away. And in the end, King Prasenajit had nothing to eat. And so he ended up had to have like a radish that he couldn't digest and died because of that. Likewise, as a Viruddhaka, in the very young, when he had gotten the path wrong, he'd gone through the Kapila Vastu where the Buddha was born, right? And so he'd ended up in Kapila Vastu, and they had a dispute with the Shakyans, and they beat him up. So when he was very young, and so they beat him really badly. So he said, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to become king. I'm going to take care of you. And so he had this friend with him and said, I'm going to remind you about it, said the friend. So the Viruddhaka became a kid. So he'd forgotten it, but then he'd forgotten about that. But his minister said, when you were young, remember what this happened? And so they just ridiculed at that time, and so he reminded him. Now he'd become king. And so he had this like a minister who was giving also the bad advice. And so he immediately went off and he went to Vakapilas, and they just completely eliminated all the Shaks. He killed them all. And so he killed almost all of them. Probably just a few left, but he basically exterminated them all. In the latter part of the Buddha's life, there were several sad or unfortunate events. So I don't need to speak about them in detail. Now, next I'd like to speak about the topic of the Buddha passing into nirvana. So in the end, the Buddha left Rajgir, crossed the Ganges River, was planning to go to Vaishali. Now, as he went through that, he went through many different villages. And he went through many towns and villages, and as he was going, he came to a place called Gandharva Nagara, where there is a blacksmith named Chunda. So a blacksmith, metal worker, and so he was called Chunda. So he offered food. Now, when he's offering the food, that food that he offered, that gave the Buddha food poisoning. The Buddha got sick. Now, some people in our minor topics of the Vinaya, what it says is that there was an evil student of the Buddha, an evil bhikshu, who'd put a little bit of some metal in the food and gave it to the Buddha. And when the Buddha ate that, he couldn't just digest the metal, right? And so this is what harmed and caused the problems. In any case, after he'd eaten the food, then the Buddha was unable to digest the food, and he vomited blood, and he also had diarrhea. And at that time, the food, as I said before, some people say that it was pork, some people say it was mushrooms, in any case, so basically there was the Buddha ended up with an incurable illness, and this is the main reason why he passed away. There is a very well-known Japanese medicine, and who has done some research into what was the illness that caused the Buddha to die, that caused the Buddha's death. And he has some experience as a medical practitioner in the way he explained it, and he used the Mahaparinirvana Sutra as a source. There's one in the Pali language, and there was one in Mahayana Sutra from the Sanskrit, and he used that and he examined the sutra. And so this is probably some sort of an ulcer, some sort of a condition in the stomach. And so this is what this Japanese scholar says. When the Buddha took that so sick, he still just pressed on, and he ended up going to Kushinagara. Now, the reason why the Buddha had to pass away in Kushinagara was later explained in many different ways by the Buddhist scholars. Now, what they say is, they explain the Buddha passing over there, is that when the Buddha passed away, he went there so that there would not be disputes at the time when his remains were there would not be disputes. The reason he went there is they're very powerful and very independent people, and so for that reason, when there'd be less of a danger for people to attack them suddenly, and so for that reason, he went to Kushinagara to pass away. So this is one explanation. So once the Buddha went to Kushinagara, and the Buddha knew that he was going to pass away soon. But even though that until he stopped breathing, he hoped to be able to continue helping sentient beings. And he said that the blacksmith Chunda was innocent. There was no problem. So many people have said, he had felt great regret. He felt unhappy that he had given the food and the Buddha got sick. And so in order to assuage him, he said that he was innocent, and in addition predicted that he would become rich in the future. And not only that, even the night before he passed away, on the very night that he passed away, there was a non-Buddhist practitioner who came, and his name was Subhadra. So this non-Buddhist named Subhadra came in, and he said he had this really difficult question, a question they just couldn't answer at all. So he absolutely has to see the Buddha, he said. Now, Ananda stopped him and said, at that point, the Buddha is sick, and he's going to pass away in a day or two, and you've got this such difficult question. Why do you have to come? And so please don't make things hard on the Buddha. Please don't harm the Buddha, Ananda said. And as they're speaking, the Buddha heard it. And the Buddha heard this and said immediately, please come in. This is the last non-Buddhist I'm going to speak to, so please bring him in. Now, when the Buddha and he asked his question and said, I'll help you, I'll do what I can to help you, he said. And what his question was, so in this world, everyone says their religion is right. Some people say you're right, others say so. In actuality, who is right? I can't determine who is right. Who is a great being? I don't know. So please tell me how to know. And what the Buddha said was, if you are someone who practices the the factors of the great path, then you are a great person. If you do not practice the factors of a good path, then you are not a noble being. And I think this is actually a really profound answer, because he didn't say, "Oh, he's not a great being and I am." He said, if you want to know if someone's a great being, you have to look at what practice do they do. You can't look at the external appearance. If say he's a non-Buddhist, looking at his clothes and wearing out non-Buddhist, you can't say they're bad because of that. Because if someone in an external appearance is a Buddhist, and you say, "Oh, they must be good," we can't say that. Primarily, you have to look, what practice are they doing? Are they actually, what's moving their mind? That's the actual summary of it. And when he said this, then Subhadra's questions were all answered. And we saw that there's all the things they thought, and he saw that the Buddha had a vaster way of understanding it, and this question was resolved. And so Subhadra became the last student of the Buddha. And after that, there were no more new students. And so that night, the Buddha passed away. He was about to pass away. He was still teaching the Dharma. He was like being insistently turning the Dharma. Not only that, within the Theravada tradition, there is the Mahaparinibbana Sutra. And if we listen, according to its explanation, the Buddha described, gave like testaments and predictions about what happened with the students in the community of the Sangha. And still the Buddha said, all of you in the Sangha, was asked, what questions, what other hopes do you have for me? He asked them over and over again, because he had such great loving kindness and compassion for this. Like, I'm about to pass away, and so what you want, whatever you want to know, please ask now. And also, what the Buddha said is that the Dharma that I've given you, is I've known the Dharma clearly on the outside and the inside. So among the Dharma's Dharma, there's no Dharma that I've concealed or hidden from my students. I've taught everything I've known without concealing any of it from my students. I've taught it to you. So you might think that there's something that I haven't taught. There's nothing at all that I haven't taught you. I have taught you all the teachings of the Bhagavan Buddha without hiding anything at all. I've taught in everything that's clearly on the outside, clearly on the inside. And in the future, he said that the leader of the Sangha in the future is the Sangha itself. There is no other leader of the Sangha. The Sangha should lead itself. Even I, as the Buddha Bhagavan, and not the boss of the Buddha. So in the future, the Sangha as a community must guide itself. It shouldn't be like there would be one person, one leader to guide the Sangha. The Sangha as a whole needs to gather. So there is no particular leader of the Sangha. So he said that. Now what this shows is that when the Buddha was passing away, there were Mahakashyapa and Ananda, Kandari and other, we speak about the lineage of elders, right? We speak about these elders, but the prime thing with the elders is those people who upheld the lineage of people upholding the Dharma, but it is not a question of the leaders of the Sangha. It's not saying that there's someone who sits above the Sangha telling them, leading it and telling them what to do. Basically saying that basically it's the Sangha is the highest, there's none above that. And so the Sangha needs to take care of itself. And then the Buddha, what he continued saying to students is, and so in the future, you must be your own light to dispel your own darkness. And you need to be your own protector who offers you self-protection. And what this shows, and to do that, is the Dharma is like a lamp. The Dharma is like a protector and a protector. So do not mistake who your protector and guardian are. The true Dharma is your protector and guardian. The Dharma is the lamp that will show you, the beacon that shows you the way. Likewise, when the Buddha passed away, he said, "Do not, you students, you do not worry about it. You shouldn't worry about what happens to my bodies. You should not think, you shouldn't get yourself involved in it all. Don't get fooled by that. You monastics must strive at the true purpose. You need to be diligent about practice." You're saying, you shouldn't worry or get involved with what's going to happen with my remains. He also said, you also do not need to worry, he said, that you will not have a teacher after I've passed away, he said. The Dharma that I've teaching, the Dharma that I've teaching, and the Vinaya will be the Dharma and the Vinaya that I've taught for you. The Dharma and Vinaya I've teaching you that I've taught you will be your teacher who shows you the path. So you have to listen to them. When we think about this from one perspective, it's very similar to many things that our Kaji forefathers have said, right? For example, Gampopa said, when he was said that after he passed away, after he went into nirvana, people think, oh, if I could only meet Gampopa. If it's possible that people might think this. And these people don't need to be disappointed or be sad and think that they haven't met me, because there's the jewel ornament of liberation and the precious path that I've written, and reading those is the same as meeting me, said Gampopa. He said, even if you were to meet Gampopa in person, there's nothing better. This is really something that's important for us to really understand in our minds. So when you think about actually with our Kajis, how many of us actually studied the jewel ornament of liberation? How many actually pay any attention to it? How actually know it? And if you think about it, actually there really aren't very many. And for one perspective, this is that Gampopa, the Marpa, Milarepa, and Gampopa are really important. Meeting them when you receive their blessings are great. But actually, we actually aren't really paying any attention to the representation to the representations of their speech. And it's the same with the Buddha. His intention was the same. He said, what was the representation of his body? What was the representation of the speech? It was the Dharma that he taught. It's all of these volumes of texts. But where do we put our volumes of text? We put them in between two other volumes. We stuck them away. And so it's like putting them in prison. Now, when you put a prisoner in prison, you can't put them there. But the volumes of the Genesis are left in the prison for a generation of They're left in the prison for centuries. They're never even opened. And you say, like, this is a wall of Dharma, we say. So this is like the monastery. It's been 300 or 500 years, and they've been gathering dust the whole time. Actually, we need to open them and think about the meaning. We need to experience them. They're not there for the stacking. They're not bricks and rocks, are they? And so if we stack them like bricks and rocks, then there would have been no meaning, no purpose for the Buddha to go through such effort to teach the Dharma. It would have been better for him to just not bother to teach the Dharma. It would have been easier for us. And so for that reason, this is something we need to keep in mind. Now, at the very end, the way the Buddha was passing away, he said to all the people around him, now, if you have any questions, do you have any questions left? And he said this 3 times. What doubts and questions do you have? He said, I'm going. So if you have any questions, what questions do you have? Tell me. And after he said this 3 times, then at that point, everyone was just completely silent. Everyone was like so sad, and they were unable to say a single word. Forget about questions, they just couldn't say anything. They couldn't say a word. And so at the very end, the final words of the Buddha were, all composites are impermanent. These are the last words of the Buddha, he said. So all phenomena are permanent. So this is my last word. So you keep it in mind. All composites are impermanent, he said. And the meaning of this is all phenomena are all composites impermanent, so they change. They're nothing stable. So you need to be careful and mindful and aware and practice them pointedly. And then after he said that, he immediately entered samadhi and passed into nirvana beneath a great shala tree. Even at the moment that he was about to pass away, he didn't give up on the students. He asked the students over and over again, what questions do you have? What doubts do you have? And so with such great love and compassion, in such a state, he passed away.
Oda dili Hindustane, ne sangi di kajureda. Gonu gelshitamba. Gonu gelshitamba Hindustane, ne?
And so the Buddha reached the age of 80 and then passed away. And the people who took care of his remains were the people of Kushinagara. And among them, these were the Mallas who took care of they offered flowers and nice scents to the remains. And eventually, then they cremated so basically you can say they cremated the stupa, cremated his remains. And then the remains of his bones, and we would call these relics, right? But basically these were the remains of his bones. Were basically apportioned or divided among 8 different tribes or countries. Because there's so many people had such faith in the Buddha, so all the different countries came and they said, we need a peace them. They're about to get in a fight in the very end, so they had to apportion them. And so that the people of Kapilavastu and the bullies of Kalakappa, the people from Ramagrama, the Brahmas of Vetadipa, the Lichavis of Vaishali, and it was shared among all of them. So at that time, when there was a vase that they used to portion the face, and so they each to get the vases. They took it, and then for each of those vases, they made there was so the vases were each used and put in a stupa each, and then there are also some other some ashes that were also put in stupa and then put in a vase, and they were put in a stupa. So in 1898, there was some archaeologists were excavating the ruins of the Shakyas, the Shakya settlements, in a place called Piprahawa. And so this place called Piprahawa. And when the archaeologists were excavating this, what they found was a vase that was filled with bones. There were lots of bones inside this vase. And when they found this vase filled with bones, on the top of it there were some inscription by Ashoka, and then there was an inscription, an even earlier inscription in a different script, What it says is, the main point, as it said, is these are the remains of the Shakyamuni for the Shakyas to make offerings to. And so what does it say is that the bones that were inside these were the undisputed, were the definitely the relics of the Buddha. And what happened to the relics is that in the end that were given to the king of Thailand. They came from Thailand, but it's like Nepal kind of didn't. It's kind of a Nepal just didn't make it. So all the most important relics from Nepal were sent to that. Now, this is during the time when India was under British control, right? So some they were sent to Thailand, and then some were later to Japan. So these were sent to the Kakuojan Nitaiji in Nagoya in Japan. Nagoya is the city. Kakuojan is the name of the mountain, and on top of that, there's a temple called Nitaiji. And so they're in that temple, it's said. Now the vase, the vase that the relics were, now that's at the museum in Calcutta. They've taken all the things that were in the vase and sent to, taken off to, or given to Thailand and Japan. They only kept the vase. And it's kept in the museum in Calcutta. So these days, what researchers say these days that the story of the relics or the remains being divided among 8 different kings or 8 different tribes is actually true, and this must be a true thing because they found the vase that was given to the Shakya peoples, and so they infer from this or deduce from this that it was divided, that it's true that the remains were divided among the 8 different peoples. Later, we have in Buddhism, we had the tradition of considering stupas very important. The reason why that they began is that the remains of the Buddha had been put in stupas, and there's the tradition of making offerings to them. And so that is the reason why we later consider the remains to be so important, or that's why we consider stupas to be so important. So that is that basically. So that's a short version of the story of the Buddha's life, but because of time, I couldn't say it at length. And perhaps in the future, if I have more time, then I will. If I have the good fortune to say more about the Buddha's life, then that would be a good fortune. Now, the main point is that the deeds and the life of the Buddha, of the Bhagavan Buddha, is like it's always say, you know, the lives of the lives of the Buddhas are something students need to practice. We always, it's basically, they're all the things that the great masters of the past have done, that we need to study them. So we need to take some, we as students need to take them as examples of how we need to practice. And this is very important. The great masters of the past practiced in this way. They achieved that sort of a result. And we have to do what we can to strive to do such deeds ourselves. And if we do that, only then is there a real point to the life stories of the Buddha and the great masters of the past. Otherwise, when you think about the life story, if you think of it like some sort of a story, the life story of the Buddha is like a story, then there's no point to it. So for that reason, we need to have an understanding of the loving kindness, compassion, and the practice and understanding of the Buddha, and to try to practice that ourselves. We need to think what his intentions and was under his intentions to. We need to understand his initial resolve, initial intentions, and see what we can do to continue that. The intention to spread the Dharma. And the reason, if we do that, if we mix it up with many different traditions and customs, and we fool ourselves with them, but actually the original intent of teaching the Dharma, the original impetus for teaching the Dharma, that the Buddha had, we just don't really understand it. It's really important for us to know this. And so, as I said before, the Buddha himself, the Buddha only thought about after he taught it, after thinking very deeply. It wasn't like he became Buddha and he went on and say, oh, I've become Buddha, I've woken up from sleep and I've got lots of things to tell you. So you all come, I've got something to say to you. It's not like that. And so this is another point that is really important for us to keep in mind. So I've only had time to speak a little bit about the life of the Buddha, but I feel that even only saying a little bit about it is just really great fortune for myself. To be completely honest, within our Tibetan tradition, there are very few of us who actually read the study of read the life of the Buddha, who study, who understand, who know the life of the Buddha. Other traditions, they know about it. For us, it's of course kind of embarrassing that we don't know anything about it. But there's nothing that we know. But so in the future, I think that it's important for you in the future to take more interested in the life of the Buddha and the story of the Buddha's life. And the reason is the person who started the Buddha's teachings was the Buddha Bhagavan. And if you don't know a little about his life and the events of his life, saying that we're followers of the Buddha is just a little bit embarrassing, I think. So it's important for everyone to keep that in mind. Otherwise, I haven't got much else to say. So tomorrow is a day off, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, we have more teaching. So that is that. So now we recite the dedication prayers.